Weapon shop owners. What crazy reasons have you had to refuse a person a sale? This lady was telling my brother, the owner of the shop, that she needed something more effective because the arrows she had been shooting weren't sinking the canoes and kayaks of people floating down the river in her backyard. They wanted to look at a piece up close. I took it out to let him see it, and he pointed it right at my face. Wasn't at the shop per se, but at the range inside the shop. I'd bought a .45 that I wanted to run a few rounds through and did just that. As I was leaving the booth and heading to the exit, an older gentleman tapped me on the arm and asked for help. I didn't work at this establishment, and compared to many, I don't have a ton of experience, but I have a pretty fricking solid understanding of safety with these devices. That being said, I stopped and asked him what he needed. He stated that he was having trouble with his weapon, which was on the bench in the booth, and that he couldn't get it to fire, even though the safety was off. As I was responding with the usual, "Do you have a round chambered?" he just picked it up, pointed it at himself, and pulled the trigger. By some sick divine intervention, it didn't fire. I slowly and firmly removed it from his hands and brought it back to said bench, where I removed the magazine and discharged a very live round. It took all of half a second to see that the safety was sitting in a cool, half-on, half-off position, and that he was scooting by on sheer dumb luck. I placed the device back on the bench, asked him to wait a minute, and walked out the doorway to the front desk. Before I could open my mouth, the range officer was walking around to give the guy a piece of his mind. In Texas, I was standing at my kitchen sink doing the dishes in a third-floor apartment one day, looking out the window. Directly across, the guy on 3 had come out with a piece and was cleaning it on a table. I looked away, and when I looked back, the family on 2 had let their toddler out on the patio with a toy. I watched in slow motion as this guy let go of the slide and aimed the piece at the ground, through the floor where the toddler was playing below, and fired a live round into the patio cement. As I was just out the door, I saw the kid's dad grab him and sweep him inside, but I've never been down and up 3 flights of stairs so quickly. In retrospect, it was stupid not to grab my own piece, and at least my phone, but Captain Intelligence on 3 wasn't hostile, just stupid. He was still holding the piece and shaking it when he answered the door. The kid was unhurt, but my faith in people's ability to safely exercise their rights may never recover. Meanwhile in Texas should be a subreddit by itself. The narrator is not mentally ready for the Meanwhile in Texas subreddit, and our viewers are certainly not ready for a 20-minute video of him attempting that accent. Other than the few who were drunk or high, one that sticks out was the guy who asked for the cheapest get, not so unusual, and only 1 bullet. After he noticed my reaction, he backpedaled and turned it into a joke. I obviously was still uncomfortable and looped my manager in. We ran the background check and told him it had been delayed and that he could come back tomorrow while we figured out what else we could do. He left without incident but then sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time. The manager decided contacting the police was the best route at the time. Not sure what happened afterwards, but he did not come back. Dude, we sell them in boxes of 20 minimum. How much more obvious can you be? Oh boy, I've turned down sales for simple things like mishandling the weapon and pointing it at people, for saying they were buying it for their husband 15 minutes after he was rejected on the InstaCheck system, but the one that took the cake was late one night, after selling hours anyways. I was closing down my department and this young couple came up to the counter. The guy was roughed up and bleeding from multiple cuts on his head. Nothing too bad, but still alarming. The girl he was with walked him up and said, "We need a piece." Rather than just say, "Sorry, it's after hours," I instead said, "Alright, which one?" She looked at the display cases and said, "I need one that will hurt someone." I just looked at her for a second, incredulous that she was that stupid. I said, "Well, they can all hurt someone," and she pointed at a Mossberg 22 and said, "What about that one?" And I said, "Yeah, that could hurt someone if it was used the wrong way," and she points at the Winchester. "What about that one?" I said, "That one is definitely dangerous." She said she'd take it, and that's when I said no. Sorry, it's past hours, and I just didn't trust her or him with a piece right now, because he obviously just got his butt kicked. She started yelling at me, and I said, "Alright, I think it's time to call the cops," and picked up the phone. That's when they said F off and left. It was pretty funny, actually. The place I teach has had a few interesting ones. I saw a customer's probation officer's card in their wallet. The owner of the shop knew the probation officer and called and asked if their client was allowed to have a weapon. The answer, surprisingly, was no. There was a lady with symptoms of being homeless who came in looking for a small piece. and while furiously dry-firing a pocket 22 says, "It's not to kill someone, but like to teach them a lesson." Lots and lots of confused people thinking that one of these things can be in their spouse's or girlfriend's name or whatever, like a car loan. It's okay if she does the paperwork, right? No, it's not. The person buying the piece has to do the paperwork. My state also has legal, medicinal, and recreational green herb use. The owner doesn't care unless you make him care, but other places, if they see your medicinal card, they don't mess around. But they still have people who come in obviously reeking of Mary Jane, since we're between two dispensaries, and the owner will be like, "Come on, you wouldn't try to mess with a piece drunk, would you?" I don't work for a specialist shop, but I was involved with a pawn shop when it went down. A neighbor had dementia and lived alone. His son was a piece of crap and randomly got him caretakers who were seriously messed up individuals. Think cops outside at 3 a.m. saying the caretaker was asking for a ride at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, high as a kite. Apparently, my neighbor owned a pair of weapons. His caretaker would pawn them monthly to buy substances and buy them back later when the neighbor's social security came in. I didn't know this, but what I did know is the caretaker was a felon, and he's not allowed to live in a house with that kind of ordinance lying around. It turned out they smelled something funny going on finally at the pawn shop when this guy, high as frick, eased this old man into the shop to sell his pieces every month. They wanted someone to co-sign for him, so he asks, reasoning that since I'm a good fellow and I work for the police department, I wouldn't have a problem with this. That I wouldn't have a problem with a felon and an elderly man with dementia buying weapons every month to store in the house. What a fricking crap show. I spoke to the manager, who went and got the store owner, who asked me to repeat the story. Thank the Lord they reported it and turned the weapons over to the cops. I'm not a clerk at one of those shops, but I've had to refuse several private sales for sketchy behavior. When people gripe about wanting to see an in-state ID or a carry permit, that's a pretty good indicator they aren't legally allowed to possess a dangerous weapon. I had one guy text me pictures of his automatic collection as proof that he had a Class 3, and therefore I wouldn't be violating the law by selling to an out-of-state buyer. He vehemently refused to meet at a federal licensing place to do the transfer, even when I offered to pay for it. Yeah, okay dude, you're clearly a felon and also your full auto-suppressed MP5 is actually a 22 with a fake can. I worked at Turner's Outdoorsman in Reseda during the early 2000s. One time a family came in, mother, father, and 13-year-old son. They wanted to buy a shotty for home protection. Okay, no problem. The issue was that they kept taking the countersample firearms and way overdoing it on racking them. The 13-year-old had obviously seen Terminator a few times and was racking the side like the woman in the movie did in the film, one-handed and really hard. That's not good for the equipment. I have to tell him to stop. The father got indignant, so I asked him to leave. I was in my early 20s, a blonde white girl, and they didn't like that. I had to get my manager to finally make them leave. I ran a weapons store and a pawn shop for 5 years. I advertised a lot of the inventory online on Facebook when that was still allowed. I had one guy ask every question imaginable about a high point, $100, a piece of garbage in my opinion. Then when he showed up, his girlfriend wanted to purchase it. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. I don't do straw purchases. Happened a lot. Guys would come in, ask about a weapon and negotiate a price, then try to send their wife or girlfriend up for the 4473. I feel good about every sale I ever denied. I only regret one sale. The piece in question was used by the gentleman to self-delete. A well-known local teacher you would never have known. Man spends 30 minutes pawning a high point, leaves without buying. 10 minutes later, strung-out-looking girl comes in, looks at her hand and goes, "Hello, I would like to buy a high point C9 in 9mm caliber with a high-capacity magazine, please." Classic. At least once a month in my store. That's incredibly concerning. Also, if it wasn't obvious, we have to use slightly more obscure words to refer to the projectile-firing descendants of old black powder weapons to get past certain limitations on this platform. But hopefully you've grasped the subject matter if you've made it this far. Just a noob question here from someone who doesn't know a lot. When you join the US Army, do they just forgo the background check, or is that part of your general background check for the forces? No. Been in the Army 13 years and have 6 weapons. The background check applies to everyone. You'll be denied a sale if you have a dishonorable discharge. At a second-hand shop, I was talking with the guy at the counter, and a dude walked in wearing full-on paramilitary, kinda school shootout garb, and a mask with a long arm slung on his back, and a smaller piece in his hand, loaded with the hammer back held out to the side, with his finger on the trigger, and he yelled if someone could help him. Obviously, me and the clerk both pull out our weapons and point them at this idiot and tell him to put it down. I'm looking around to see if there's anyone else around. People are freaking out in the parking lot because they see I have a piece, and I tell them to call the police. Turns out this inbred idiot had just come back from playing airsoft and wanted to sell a weapon he bought off the street. I'm not a shop owner. I was in a store when the following happened that made me go, how freaking stupid can you be? A guy came in to buy a weapon, begins to fill out NICS, checked yes on 11B, are you under felony indictment, and got denied. He said, well, I'm out on bail, so I should be able to have a weapon. The clerk asked what for. Domestic. Checked no on H. Do you have an order of protection against you? The clerk says he's going to call NICS to file an appeal. The clerk calls the police. The police arrive. The idiot is arrested and goes back to jail with new charges, including lying on Form 4473. I know criminals are dumb, but come on, man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I sold the items in question in a sporting goods store. A guy comes in and was looking at our selection. He claimed he was a former CIA assassin. Sure, whatever. He picked up a weapon, cocked it, and pointed it at me and pulled the trigger. I put it back and told him he was not buying anything from me or anyone else in this department. He looked at me and said, I'll be back for you. I called over one of my colleagues who was an off-duty cop that worked there part-time and told him what had happened. He flashed his badge and told the guy to leave the store and to not come back. The man left, cussing up a storm, and I never saw him again. When I'm reading this, I'm just imagining the customer as a really edgy teen. A lady came into my store and wanted to buy a Ruger 10-22, but when she told me which one she wanted, she just said, the black one. Fine, I don't care if she doesn't know the name, and I thought, what a perfect opportunity to upsell her on some training that we offered. Well, I got out the old form and walked her through my generic spiel, noting specifically, if you have no middle name, please put NMN in the box for middle name, not just NA. Just write NMN for no middle name. Attempt 1, the lady puts a big X through the box for middle name. I calmly explain it to her again and get her a new form. She puts NA in the box. I look at her questioningly and asked if she has a middle name, to which she responds no. I start to explain the process to her for a third time when she gets livid, picks up the 4473 form and rips it in half, and calls me a racist white boy cracker, who is being difficult over a stipularity. I think it was a cross between stipulation and technicality. I looked at her plainly and said, well, if you can't fill out the form, you can't buy the weapon. The sale is denied. After some more heated words sent my way, she was escorted out by the owner, who was watching the whole thing and listening from the back office 10 feet away. I denied a sale when someone admitted that they'd shot a bear at a state park out of season, poaching, and another time when someone pretty much told me they were going to use the item to kill a guy in Alabama. I also stopped numerous straw purchases. Most of the time, people didn't understand that it wasn't legal. The number of people who would absolutely lose their minds when I would have to walk them out the front door before I could give them their weapon was crazy. It was just store policy, but sometimes it would make the most normal weapon buyer turn nuts. There was this one guy who would come in about once a week with a new person each time. They'd be buying a weapon for themselves, but they didn't know anything about weapons. At first, I thought the guy was just helping friends pick one out, but after a while, he winked at me and said, "See you at the revolution." Cult leader? Anti-government? Who knows? I soon after left that job and never saw him again, but it sure left me with stories. As much as I'm sure all of our viewers from the States will enjoy hearing this from a person with a British-ish voice, there really needs to be a better form of control than just filling out a simple form, even though that basic task does seem to elude some of these morons. I was at my local store for these items, just chatting after picking a few things up. Another guy comes in looking for suppressors, says he's interested in one, to which the clerk starts explaining the tax stamp paperwork. In my state, you can own NFA items no problem. You don't get jammed up, but still go through the ATF process. The guy digests it all, says that's fine, understands the $200 tax, etc. The guy says something along the lines of, okay, I'll fill everything out and then come pick it up later this afternoon. To which the employee laughs, thinking he's joking, because if you've ever been through the process, the wait time is on average 9 months to a year. Personally, the fastest I've had an item processed is 7 months, but every other one has been at least 9. So the store employee was obviously thinking he's joking. The guy was dead serious and that he thought he could pick it up that afternoon. He got really irate and started cussing the employee out, and said, "If you're not willing to give it to me today, why do you even display them?" Then came a few racial slurs. The employee helping him was Hispanic, and as the rest of the employees came over to escort him out, he said something like, "Y'all wait until I raise hell with the Better Business Bureau," and then a few more racial slurs before he was physically escorted out. The other one was told to me by a friend who works at a different store. The guy comes in wanting to buy a piece, and when handed the paperwork he says, "Oh, I didn't think there were background checks in this state," and leaves. Not long after all this, a patron who had just left the range comes back in letting them know that as soon as he got to his car, some guy came up asking if he'd sell one of his pieces for cash, no questions asked. The guy was just walking around the parking lot asking people if they would sell him one. When the police came and arrested him, he actually yelled, "But I was told anyone can buy guns in this state without ID." That was his actual response to the police. Apparently he had warrants in California and a bunch of missed court appearances. Another one was relayed to me from a friend who was at an auction house bidding on some weapons. Up for auction, there was a double-rune Mauser, which symbolized the rifle was likely used or issued by German special forces in World War II. They tend to sell for a very high premium. Some guy who got outbid tried to cause a scene about how these weapons should stay with the race and not go to those people, still arguing about it as the police arrested him after refusing to leave. Used to work at a specialist store and law enforcement supply. I saw a lot of stupid things, cops almost discharging their duty weapon, etc., even had a couple of holes in the ceiling from before I started. But the craziest reason I've denied someone was arguably the dumbest. Not dumb in the way some of the others have posted. I had plenty of denials for attempted straw purchase. So this frequent customer decides to bring his dad in one day to get a new piece to carry. Spend about 30 minutes helping him pick out a good one and a nice holster to go with it. He filled out the background check form and I'm getting ready to call it in when I noticed something odd. In the section where you select your ethnicity, he had drawn his own checkbox and wrote, Native Mexican American. I informed him that he wasn't allowed to do that and he just needed to do as the instructions stated. Select the box that matched his ethnicity the closest, i.e. Latino. He just could not be convinced to select a meaningless box on a form that the info didn't even get reported on. I had to deny the sale. I half wonder if he was just crazy or if he was an agent testing me with something stupid. A guy with SS Thunderbolts on his neck. I didn't even show him his piece he sent for the transfer, just told him to get out and I sent the weapon back. There was also a crazy lady who during the paperwork said it was for protection from the Mexicans in her basement that snuck up in the night to get her. I told her she was delayed and called the police. In case you're wondering, this is Tucson, Arizona, where there are almost no basements. And finally, a lady who came in asking for a particular model. We showed it to her. I asked her questions about ammo as she was smaller and it was a large weapon. She kept checking her phone and said this is the one she wanted even though she didn't know the caliber or the first thing about these kinds of weapons. I put 2 and 2 together, I explained what a straw purchase is and told her to leave. A customer came in and picked out a weapon, did the 4473 and failed the NICS check, tried to get us to sell it to his girlfriend instead. That's a big no. I sell at weapon shows with my buddy who has an FFL, and these young kids, they had to be about 13 years old, came up with a stack of cash, around $2,000, and they wanted to buy 4 AKs, so I asked them for ID as I pulled out the 4473s, because I've seen older guys that look young as heck as well. I told them that each AK is $700 and they said, wait, what are those papers? So I asked them how old they were and they said 18, but didn't want to fill out the paperwork because they want to take them to Mexico. I told my buddy to go call the cops and they left as quickly as they could. I had a woman buy 10,000 rounds of .22 long round and tried to buy 2 Ruger 10-22 rifles and a Smith & Wesson MP15. And she filled out her 4473 and I called it in and she got delayed. The FBI can delay the sale or pickup for 5 days in North Carolina if the person needs an investigation on their background. I'm still waiting for a reply, and she comes back the next day to ask if felons can buy weapons. and that she hopes they could because she was tired of seeing the zombies eat people in her yard and highway and crap. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that she didn't instantly get denied when I called the day before. If she just admitted to this crazy crap, I manage a second-hand shop in North Carolina for those wondering. Customer here. I once saw a guy claiming to be a veteran throw a tantrum about how he misunderstood the waiting period and apparently failed to file proper DROS paperwork, so his waiting period had to restart. The whole room got quiet and I was pretty sure he was seconds away from being denied and getting escorted out until he came to his senses and filed the correct documents. Good lord! Can you withhold sales from someone who nearly flies off the handlebars like this? Part of me is wishing you could, although I suppose it would be hard to justify. I was at a store once when the owner, Gunther, prevented two people from buying big automatic pieces. One of them was institutionalized for setting her roommate on fire, and the other one was wanted for questioning in many felonious assaults. In the store I worked at, I was hit with a wall of alcoholic stench from 5 feet away. He couldn't even spell his own name right on the background check and expected me to fill it out. He didn't have a form of ID. He wanted the cheapest piece we had. It was all around just a bad experience. My friend used to work as a security guard at the local psych hospital, but because of the laws, he can't state specifically why he's denying each person. When he sees people who he knew were admitted for mania with homicidal ideation, he would just tell his boss, the owner, that he was refusing the sale and knew the customer from prior work experience. His boss knows how to read between the lines on that, and fortunately, federal law supports their right as a shop to refuse to sell a weapon to anyone provided that the reason isn't because of their race, ethnicity, or other federally protected discrimination statuses. I've seen people get refused for stupid reasons, like outright saying that they're buying it for someone else. Not an owner, just a law here in Australia I learned about recently. If you've had a restraining order placed against you, which can be applied for anyone, even without proof of any danger, in the last 10 years, then you're ineligible to own, use, or buy a gun. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.